Well, good evening once again, and welcome to program number 8 in our series of virtual cocktails and music for those continuing to be under stay-at-home restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Mark.
And I'm Karen.
Welcome to our home in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, just over the Cooper River Bridge from the city of Charleston. Joining us again are our friends Peg and Larry in Williamsburg.
Hey guys.
And our grandsons are here once again too, virtually. We typically don't invite them to a cocktail hour, but they can send their virtual emojis if they wish to the cocktail hour. So things are starting to loosen up here a little bit. Our governor and local municipalities are starting controlled reopening tomorrow. The beaches are going to be open, but just for exercise. You can't congregate, you can't lay out and sunbathe, but you can walk on the beach. And restaurants can begin serving in outdoor dining venues as long as social distancing continues. And I got an email from Coconut Joe's saying that they were open for business. They're gonna serve up on their upper rooftop deck.
Great.
So how about in Virginia? How are things going there?
Now, yesterday our governor announced that they were extending the stay at home for a few days from the 10th to the 15th, but on the 15th they're going to enter phase 1, which is going to open up certain businesses, including restaurants, but there's going to have to be limited number of people in the restaurants and separation. And hair salons, which they're also going to have to follow various social distancing and wear masks and all that kind of stuff, but they're going to be able to give haircuts, which we're really looking forward to.
Maybe they'll give them the parking lot.
No. Yeah, what's going to happen is only one person at a time is going to be allowed in for each chair, and the rest will have to sit in the parking lot and wait, so bring your paper or whatever. We can't sit there and wait and convince with done.
No.
That's not allowed.
Well, and today was really the first. Up until today, we've been able to open up the house, let the breezes flow through. The weather's been great. Today it was so hot, we had to just close everything up and turn the air conditioner on, and it really feels a bit like a prison with everything all buttoned up like that.
Yeah.
Oh well. So anyway, for tonight's program, as we said the last time we got together, we visit the Gulf Coast and the city of New Orleans. And our featured music is the music of Louis Armstrong. And our featured cocktail is the New Orleans-born Sazerac, which also happens to be the official state cocktail of Louisiana. Yes, I didn't know they had a state cocktail. I know South Carolina has a state bird, and it is the cocktail, but I don't know if we have a cocktail. Anyway. We went to New Orleans in 2016. That was our first and only time in the city, and we stayed at the historic Roosevelt Hotel, which is a wonderful old hotel, and we visited Bourbon Street. And this was my first experience with the Sazerac, and I fell in love with it immediately. I made it my quest to find the best Sazerac in New Orleans. So another thing I really like about New Orleans is that you can walk around town with a drink in your hand. And I almost always had a Sazerac in my hand while we were there. It takes a little bit of effort to make, but it's well worth it. And the name comes from, we were just talking beforehand, originally it was, when it was first introduced in the New Orleans French Quarter in the 1850s, it was made with a cognac that was called Sazerac de Forge et Fille, which is Sazerac of Forge and Sons. So Forge and Sons obviously had a distillery someplace in France, and they made this cognac called Sazerac, and I don't know if it's still out there today or not. But it's not made with that changed, and I go into that when I'm making the drink here. So anyway, why don't we take a few minutes and let's walk through the making of a classic Sazerac. There really isn't much debate about the origin of the Sazerac. It was born in New Orleans in the 1850s. But the original recipe is a little bit different than today. Originally it called for cognac rather than whiskey. The recipe changed in around 1870 The coffee house actually was renamed the Sazerac Coffee House, and a gentleman named Thomas Handy bought it, and he swapped out the cognac for rye whiskey to make it more suitable for American palates. In 1949, the Sazerac Coffee House was purchased by the Roosevelt Hotel, so the Sazerac bar is in the Roosevelt Hotel today. And if you go to New Orleans and you want to have a really good Sazerac, don't get it there. Sorry, it's not just my opinion. They've never been voted the best Sazerac in New Orleans, but the people who have are the Galatoire. It's the Galatoire restaurant on Bourbon Street. So if you want to have a really good Sazerac, a proper Sazerac, and you're in New Orleans, go over to Galatoire's on Bourbon Street. Anyway, there are 4 fundamental ingredients to a proper Sazerac, and you probably don't have any of them at home, I'll bet. The first one is rye whiskey. Now there is a whiskey that's actually branded Sazerac whiskey, and it's a rye whiskey. You can use any whiskey you want, and as with any drink that calls for a brown liquid, some people want to put bourbon in it, some people are going to put blended whiskey in it. I use rye whiskey. That's the recipe since 1870, and I think it tastes best. And I use bullet rye. Bullet rye might be a little bit higher end than some others, but I don't drink that much rye whiskey. In fact, I think the Sazerac is the only drink that I have that has rye whiskey in it, so I use bullet rye. It's wonderful. This is critical. This is a herb saint. And now some people will use absinthe, licorice flavored liqueur. It's up to your taste. I've had it both ways. I prefer this. This is really the ingredient, but you can't get this in just about any liquor store. You'll never find it. You have to buy it online. I bought this when we were in New Orleans, and I bought 2 bottles of it at the time, and years later I still have some left in this one, so it lasts a very long time. And then you need some bitters, and the proper bitters to use, in my opinion, are Peychaud. And not just because they have a French name, but Angostura bitters and Peychaud bitters have a very different flavor. And Peychaud bitters seem to work much better with the rye whiskey and the herb saint. Now you're going to need a little bit of simple syrup and a healthy piece of lemon peel. So let's get started. The first thing to do is take your herb saint right directly in the glass that you're going to serve it in. Pour just a tiniest little bit in there. Very tiny little bit, because all you're going to do with this is coat the glass. And this is an important step. Coat the glass. Don't just pour it in. And you can just turn the glass up like this, turn it around, coat the sides of the glass. Now some recipes will say once you've coated the glass to pour out the extra. I don't do it because I didn't put that much in there to start with. Now we set that aside for a moment. Now we take our rye whiskey and have put in 2 ounces. A few dashes of the Peychaud bitters. I like put 6 or 7 or 8, who's counting? It's not just 1. And about a teaspoon of simple syrup. So we got some ice in here. Now I do not shake a Sazerac. I prefer not to shake drinks that have whiskey or bourbon in it. They come out foamy, which I just don't care for. But neither do I just gently stir it either. I'm going to aggressively stir this thing, changing directions. Really, you almost need a shield here. And I'm going to aggressively stir this for a minimum of 30 seconds. There we go. Now we put that in the glass where our herb saint has been percolating. Isn't that a beautiful color? And for the garnish, and this is not just the garnish, it's important. you get a healthy lemon peel, something that's like an inch thick. Now, if you've never done this before, something I realized, if you just cut through the rind of the lemon, then you can get your thumb up underneath of that, and I can't really show you this, just slide it, and you end up with just the peel coming off like that. Now, this is important. You take that and you just rub it around the rim of the glass, and then you place it in the glass. And there you have it. The classic Sazerac, born and bred in New Orleans. Cheers.
Wow.
So that is a Sazerac. And unlike the Manhattan, remember Larry said if you went into a bar and you couldn't order a Manhattan, you need to go to another bar? A Sazerac is not something that you can just walk into any bar and order. And in fact, I'm not sure that you could order one outside New Orleans. Maybe Louisiana and other places in Louisiana, but outside of New Orleans and Louisiana, I don't think you could order a Sazerac. So anyway, when it comes to Louis Armstrong, there's no shortage of material, and Froggy wanted to join us again. He was on episode 3, as I recall, because he's a big fan of Louis Armstrong.
I see through the green, red roses too.
See, no, you sang that on episode 3, Froggy, and you're not going to do it again here. So he's going to have to behave himself, because I'm going to sing that song when we do the music, and you just keep out of it, all right? Anyway, one could easily do a 2-hour documentary on Louis Armstrong's life, but I tried to condense it into a short little 5-minute flyover, and maybe there'll be something in here that you didn't know. So anyway, here's some information on Louis Armstrong. Although he often said he was born on the 4th of July in 1900, Louis Daniel Armstrong, also known as Sach or Pops or Sachmo, was actually born on August 4th, 1901. He was born in New Orleans to Mary Albert, who was just 16 at the time. His father, William Armstrong, abandoned the family shortly after Louis's birth. About 2 years later, William Armstrong fathered a daughter by another woman, and Louis's mother, Mary Albert, took her in and raised her. This is Armstrong with his mother and his sister in 1921. Louis spent his first 5 years being raised by his grandmother, returning to his mother when he was 5 years old. When he was 6, he met the Karnofskis, a family of Lithuanian Jews who, knowing he had no father, they nurtured and fed him. And he did odd jobs for them. This is their house. But New Orleans at the time was not a good place to be either black or Jewish. In his own words, Armstrong said, "I was only 7 years old, but I could easily see the ungodly treatment that the white folks were handing the poor Jewish family whom I worked for." From that time on, he wore a Star of David pendant for the rest of his life. It was the Karnofskis also that gave him the money to purchase his first horn from a pawn shop. When he was 12 years old, he got into trouble and spent some time in a juvenile detention center. But it was here that he met his first music teacher, Peter Davis. And when he was released, he spent his time playing in brass bands and on riverboats in New Orleans. He married his first wife, Daisy Parker, in 1919. He would have been 18 years old. They adopted a 3-year-old boy named Clarence, who was orphaned when Armstrong's cousin Flora had passed away. Clarence was mentally disabled due to a head injury at an early age. I could not find any pictures of Daisy or Clarence. In 1922, he followed his teacher and mentor, trumpet player Joe King Oliver, to Chicago to play in the Creole Jazz Band. Armstrong was quoted as saying about his teacher, "If it had not been for Joe Oliver, jazz would not be what it is today." Oliver's Creole Jazz Band was one of the most influential bands in Chicago in the 1920s. Armstrong's marriage to Parker ended in 1923, but he spent the rest of his life caring for Clarence. In 1924, he married his second wife, Lil Hardin, the piano player in the Creole Jazz Band. In 1929, he went to that place all musicians seeking success prior to World War II went, New York City. This is him with a band at the Saratoga Club in 1930. But when the Great Depression hit in the early 30s, he moved to Los Angeles, then back to Chicago a year later, where he was promptly run out of town by the mob. It was about this time, in 1931, that he and Lil Hardin separated, finally divorcing in 1938 when he married his third wife, Alpha Smith. But that marriage lasted only 4 years, and then he married his fourth wife, Lucille Wilson, to whom he stayed married until his death. He returned to New Orleans, but went on the road a lot, touring a lot of countries. Jazz was all the rage at the time, and he became an ambassador for it, literally. In the late 1950s, the U.S. State Department developed a program to send jazz musicians all over the world to improve America's image, and he became an official cultural diplomat. But in 1959, he suffered a heart attack and had to take a sabbatical and rest. In 1964, he recorded his biggest-selling record ever, Hello, Dolly. It remained in the top 100 for 22 weeks. It reached number 1, making him, at 62 years old, the oldest person to ever do so, and unseating the Beatles' 14-week streak at being number 1 in that process. In March 1971, he suffered a second heart attack after playing a 2-week engagement at the New York Waldorf Astoria's Empire Room. He was released from the hospital in May and quickly resumed playing the trumpet. In July, he suffered a fatal heart attack while sleeping. He was residing in Queens, New York at the time. He is buried at the Flushing Cemetery in Queens. His honorary pallbearers included Bing Crosby, Ella Fitzgerald, Dizzy Gillespie, Pearl Bailey, Count Basie, Harry James, Frank Sinatra, Alan King, Johnny Carson, and David Frost. None of Armstrong's marriages ever produced any offspring. However, in 2012, 42 years after his death, someone claiming to be his daughter from an affair with a dancer at the Cotton Club came forward. This was not an attempt at financial gain, for Armstrong had admitted to being her father in 1955, and she had been secretly receiving a monthly stipend since 1965, something to the tune of about $5,000 in today's dollars. The nickname Sachmo is short for satchel mouth. As a child, he would hide coins in his mouth to prevent older kids from stealing them. In 2017, he was posthumously inducted into the Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. Okay, so that's a short look at the life of Louis Armstrong. And now we'll take a similarly short look at some of his music. Here's to the music of Louis Armstrong. Cheers.
Here.
Years.
Or as they say in New Orleans, laissez les bons temps rouler.
Oh yes, let the good times roll. The song was written by Jerry Herman in 1964 for the Broadway musical by the same name. It was the biggest hit. Louis Armstrong recorded it that same year in 1964, and it was the biggest hit of his entire career. It went to number 1 on the Billboard charts, ending the Beatles' 14-week streak of having 3 songs up in the number 1 slots during those 14 weeks. It also made Louis Armstrong the oldest person to ever hit a number 1 song on the top of the Billboard charts.
Hello, Dolly. Well, hello, Dolly. It's so nice to have you back where you belong. You're looking swell, Dolly, I can tell. Dolly, you're still growing, you're still growing, you're still going strong. I feel the roof sway while the band is playing one of our old favorite songs from way back when. So take her rap, fellas, find her an empty lap. Fellas, Dolly, don't ever go away again.
Hello, darling. This is Louis, darling. So nice to have you back where you belong. You looking swell, darling. I can tell, darling. Still glowing, still growing, still going strong. I feel the roof swaying, and the band is playing one of my old favorite songs from way back when. So, golly gee, fella, find her an empty knee, fella. Dolly, never go away. Dolly, say you're here to stay. Dolly, never go away again. Oh.
This song was written in 1928 for a musical in New York City entitled Whoopee! Gus Kahn, no relation to Sammy Kahn, and Walter Donaldson wrote all the music for the show, including this song, which is the only song from the show that has survived. And I'm not exactly sure how long it will survive, given how culturally insensitive, shall we say, some of the lyrics are. Another bride, another groom, another sunny honeymoon, another reason, another season for making whoopee. The chorus sings, here comes the bride, another victim is by her side. He's lost his reason, 'cause it's the season for making whoopee. Down through the countless ages, you'll find it everywhere. Somebody makes good wages, somebody wants her share. Told you it was culturally insensitive. She calls him Toodles and rolls her eyes. She makes him strudels and bakes him pies. What is it all for? It's so he'll fall for making whoopee. Another year, maybe less. What's this I hear? Well, you can guess. She feels neglected, so he's suspected of making whoopee. She sits alone most every night. He doesn't phone or even write. He says he's busy, but she says, is he? He's making whoopee. He doesn't make much money, $5,000 per. Some judge who thinks he's funny says, you'll pay 6 to her. He says, now judge, suppose I fail. The judge says, buddy, straight to jail. You better keep her, you'll find it's cheaper than making whoopee. Yeah, you better keep her, you'll find it's cheaper than making whoopee. Much cheaper song was written in 1967 by Bob Thiele and George Weiss, and according to Weiss, it was written specifically for Louis Armstrong, having been inspired by Sachmo's ability to bring people of different races and ethnic backgrounds together. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, and not so much anymore, saying how do you do. They're really saying I love you. I see babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a
wonderful world. Oh, it's such a beautiful sunny day.
yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
And so, despite an interruption from my friend here, that is our tribute to the music of Louis Daniel Armstrong. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope that you will enjoy Sazerac at some time, either in New Orleans or in your own home. For our next program, we're thinking about Paris. We'll see. We haven't totally worked that out yet. I've never been to Paris, but certainly the city has inspired much music and cocktails for a couple of 100 years. But until then, thank you for inviting us into your home, and thank you for doing your part to slow the spread of COVID-19. Thank you to our first responders, our police, fire, EMS, and thank you always to our men and women in uniform. Thank you for all of your service to this nation. Until we get together again, stay safe. God bless you, and God bless America.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with your light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam.